Retro.
Hey, you scruffy nerf herders. This is Catherine Tabor, Mission Veo from Knights of the Old Republic, and you're listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Aren't you lucky?
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode will feature the second installment in our Darth Bane Path of Destruction book club. But before we get into the latest adventures of Des, Jay, we'll go ahead and remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
Absolutely. You can join us for all of our adventures over on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the digital aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So again, this is part 2 of our book club. We are covering chapters 4 through 6 of Path of Destruction by Drew Karpyshyn. And before we get into the discussion itself, I just wanted to extend kind of a thank you to everyone who's reached out. This has been very well received. We've remarked on it before. We've seen lots of people posting pictures on Instagram with their copy of the book and reading the book. And I've been getting some direct messages from people on various platforms, whether that's Discord or Instagram, with questions and observations from people that have read the book before and some that are reading it for the very first time. So I don't know about you, Jay, I'm just really pleased with how much people are enjoying this and reaching out to us about it.
Oh, absolutely. And, as you said, some people are reading it for the first time. And I just think that that's so wonderful that we're getting people kind of into the fold, if you will, of this book and the series, because it truly is, I think a masterpiece in the Legends era, and kind of giving us that insight into the dark side and so much. So thank you, everybody that's been giving us those kudos. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. So I'll go ahead and kick this off with a summary, and then Jay, you'll take us into our discussion. But here we go. From a Sabacc table on Apatros to the brutal front lines of a war against the Jedi, Des is no longer just surviving. He's starting to bend the galaxy around him. In chapters 4 through 6 of Darth Bane, Path of Destruction, Drew Karpyshyn, the dark side begins choosing him. The dark side erupts around Des. He chooses the Sith over an alternate future, and on the battlefield, he proves an unyielding truth that foreshadows his destiny. Weak leaders don't deserve to lead. So there we go.
Yes. And so I think that there's just so much foreshadowing in these chapters that, on the surface level, there's a Sabacc game, there's Des getting to leave Apatros and joining the Sith army, and then really kind of putting himself into a leadership position. But truly, there's a lot more going on than that. So let's start with, obviously, chapter 4. And Des is playing the Sabacc game to win the jackpot. And he keeps protecting his pot by coming up early instead of folding. And then it kind of goes from there. And he's instigating things with these soldiers. And he's kind of getting caught into the classic, gambler's trap of swiping his Oro card and buying in. But he keeps getting this feeling that something's going to go his way. Something's going to go his way. And, as it turns out, he ends up having the hand of his life and beating this ensign and through this idiot's array, but yet it goes down to a sudden demise. And there's so much tension that's happening in here. But again, there's just so much more than just a Sabacc game. So reading between the lines on that, first of all, why do you think that Des really chooses to play at all? I mean, obviously he knows that no matter how much he wins, they've already said that the Oro Corporation limits the amount that the players are allowed to win. It controls the winnings. It controls this. It controls that. So what is it about this game that truly attracted Des to wanting to have to sit down in the first place, knowing he wasn't really going to get a whole lot out of it.
Well, there's a lot going on with Sabacc here. And one, it's a bit about this desire to control his own destiny. And two, there's a pull for him with this. He can't explain it. We saw it in the last episode we did where he knew where Gerd, the other miner he was fighting, was going to be in certain moments, and he didn't exactly know why. And he didn't know why certain hands were going to be winners for him. He just knew. Mm-hmm. And then similarly, in this case, he's got this premonition that he is going to win this jackpot here. You know, as every hand is played, some money goes into the potential jackpot, and then you can win it a couple different ways, but one of them is to hit an idiot's array, which is the idiot card, a 2 and a 3. Your main goal is to try and get a 23. That's Sabacc, and then you win. And he gets dealt a hand. He knows this is going to be the payoff, and so he gets a 2. He puts that in interference field. He gets a 3. He puts that in interference field, and then both he and the ensign come up at the same time. And when he knew exactly what was going to happen. The ensign came up on an idiot's array, and so did he, which is unheard of because there's only 2 idiot cards in the whole deck, and they both come up at the same time. And then that sudden demise, the pot should have been lost because the next card would destroy his array, and he wouldn't have Sabacc, except for they both got a 9, which meant another card had to be dealt. The ensign got an 8. And he got another night, which put him back at Sabacc. He won the jackpot. But here's the thing: it's more about cards, as you were asking. It is about him strategizing. It's about him looking into the future, controlling the people around him, manipulating them into doing things that they don't want to do, and act in ways they don't necessarily want to act, keeping them around. It's also beyond that. It's him making sacrifices. Yeah, he was realizing he was falling into that gambler's trap of spending more credits than he had, chasing a jackpot that he may not win. But what those other people didn't have is the dark side behind them. The force was propelling him towards this, and he knew it. And he couldn't put it in those words. He doesn't see himself as a Jedi, the Sith, or anyone with these type of force powers, but he had a strategy and he played it out, and it worked.
Oh, absolutely. And he doesn't even have any kind of inkling that this is the force for, quite a while yet, as we're going to see in the next couple of chapters. But, backing up, obviously, first of all, loved the whole idea of getting to get taken through the Sabacc game and just every step of the way and knowing the rules and what was happening with the cards and everything. But as you pointed out, it wasn't about for Des to win the credits. He sat down because he wasn't thinking in terms of money. He was thinking in terms of defiance. And as you said, everyone else has always controlled him. This game becomes a kind of a symbolic battlefield. The Republic represents one thing for him. It's like this systemic kind of dominant sort of thing. And then Sabacc represents chaos and chance. And he represents raw, unrecognized potential. So when you put all of those things together, and Des realizes that the rules don't always apply to him in the same way because he has this feeling that he just knows, as you said, what's going to happen. That's why when he starts winning, it feels almost intoxicating. It's not the credits. It's that feeling that the universe is finally starting to bend toward him and his power, and the dark side takes notice. Because after he wins and that ensign loses it, there is something that happens in the cantina that Groshik points out that everyone could feel. So let's get into that just a little bit. So after, the ensign kind of goes off and there's this big uproar, and the table, even though it was basically magnetized to the floor, the entire cantina starts to erupt in violence. And Groshik grabs his gun and shoots it into the sky and basically tries to get everybody to calm down. throws everyone out of the cantina. Everything is a mess. And so he makes Des stick around and help him to clean. So my next question to you is on this whole thing is what's really happening with the dark side in the cantina? Because Groshik says, I could feel it. Everyone could feel it. It was all I could do to not shoot my gun into the crowd. So what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Groshik doesn't know exactly what's happening. But he knows something odd is going on here, and he recognizes that there is more with Des than just playing cards in this situation. That I think at first he wanted to play it off of, why are you so angry that you are throwing, you're playing recklessly here? Because, Des comes up on a bomb out. He had it, without even looking at his cards, he came out on -23, which you pay a penalty for. So he lost his hand, lost his ante, and had to pay a penalty for that. Those type of things were handling, but he had that goal. He wasn't going to let anyone build a hand that could possibly win the jackpot. And that's part of the explanation. But as you were just talking about, Des is manipulating everybody here. And I like the way you said, like, the dark side's taken notice of him. He's socked it to the Republic in the previous chapter by kind of pointing out their shortfalls and why it is that people might be interested in signing up with Sith because, hey, that the strong survive. Well, that sounds pretty good out here, right? And now he's kind of got them on a leash. It is, he can't strike back at the ORO corporation, the ones that are really controlling everything that he's involved in. But the Republic lets that happen. So he's doing the next best thing. He's taking the money out of these Republic officers. Several of them run out of money and get up and leave. But it's this one ensign that just, carelessly throws his own credits in time and time again, that stays there and continues to try and match him. And it kind of like becomes this thing for Des. It's like he has to beat this one guy. As you were suggesting, the jackpot's great, but it's not going to clear out everything he owes that he can leave. But, that's his goal someday. But it is about beating this one guy. And that's something the dark side looks favorably on, crushing your enemy here. And, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. We all know this from, the Phantom Menace. Des has moved through all of that. And he's directly on hate right now and exerting his will over these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing. I think, what you just pointed out with wanting to beat this one guy is that I think that distinction matters. It foreshadows the kind of Sith that Des eventually becomes. He's a conqueror. He's about bending outcomes. And, he's angry enough and he's willing to challenge authority directly, that again, the dark side kind of responds to that. And so I think in the cantina, for me anyways, it's more like Des was almost like a leaking reactor. He was not focusing the dark side intently himself towards any one person or any one thing, but his anger and his resentment and everything that had happened to him up to this point was being focused in on this Sabacc game and on this ensign and on these Republic soldiers, that it was spilling outwards into everyone that was in the cantina. And it became very uncontained. And that raw, uncontrolled projection was, I think, the reason why everyone reacted the way that they did. And obviously later on, Des, who becomes Bane, obviously, is able to focus that power a lot more poignantly, a lot more specifically. But at this point, that fear, that hostility, not really fear, but hostility, violence, they're all feeding back on themselves, which is so powerful in and of itself.
Yeah. The other thing about this chapter I really like is that what occurred to me is that this Sabacc game is like the original big Sabacc game in Star Wars. There's been other Sabacc games that come up in those stories, but like this is the one with like some of the biggest consequences at the time. But then we have another Sabacc game that I'm sure way more people are familiar with that came up in Solo: A Star Wars Story. when
Yeah.
Han and Lando were playing for the Millennium Falcon. I'm talking about the first time, and then the second time when Han wins after he catches Lando cheating. But I don't know that there's a lot of comparisons to draw with necessarily the Force and things like that. They both had different goals, but just what struck me is that in both instances, they were destiny changing moments. It
Mm-hmm.
is Des's victory over this Republic ensign here that sets him on a new path. It is Han's first match against Lando and then his second match against Lando. One he loses and the other one he wins, and he acquires the Falcon. But he gets furthers a mission the first time and then sets up like the rest of his life with Chewbacca and the Falcon the second time, based on the cards and manipulating perceptions. And he robbed Lando's ability to cheat, which is something for certain. But again, it's not a perfect comparison, but I do like this notion about these people drawn to this game, like Han, like Lando, like Des, that they are galaxy altering type figures. Not to state it too grandly or to overstate it, but you get what I mean? It's just like there's something
Oh,
of
yeah.
a bit of destiny that comes around with these types.
Oh, absolutely. I love those parallels that you drew there. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's interesting because no one goes back to the Sabacc game in Des's personal history to say, "Oh, this was the pivotal moment," kind of thing that truly changed his life forever and created this legend of Darth Bane. But yet, like you said, you pointed out the Sabacc game for Han and Lando, we go back to that well over and over and over again, and we go, oh yeah, it was because of that Sabacc game. So there's
Mhm.
definitely a much different tone here. Obviously with this game in the book, it's a lot more ominous. It's more, faded in a different kind of way. Whereas with Han and Lando, it's more got almost like a swashbuckling feel to it, kind
Yeah.
of thing, which is almost like that piratey sort of kind of feel, but it leads to this partnership later and legend, which is so different. And there's a difference in the feeling there too. There's like a cunning versus a chaos. Like this game is more chaos, whereas Lando and Hans is more cunning kind of thing. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah. They're trying to get each other off their game, but the consequences aren't so dire in the process here. It's they both kind of recognize what's at stake and what they're both going after. Unlike Des and the Ensign are playing two different games, and it's really Des's game that overpowers the Ensigns. So.
Right, right. Oh,
Mhm.
absolutely. I like that. I like that a lot. Anything else you want to say about chapter 4 before we turn to chapter 5?
No, the next comment I've got is for chapter 5. So carry
Okay.
on.
All right.
Yeah.
So we basically wrap up chapter 4 with Groshik making Des stay afterwards to clean up the cantina, and it takes them about an hour to do so. And they share a little bit of history there as they are doing so. And then Des goes to leave in chapter 5, and he gets jumped by who we find out to be these soldiers, and it's completely dark. And Des kind of senses this coming. So he encounters these Republic officers waiting for him. And in the darkness of the fight, he ends up, quote unquote, seeing this glow of the vibroblade. And he's able to wrestle it from the one attacker. And then, as he is then brought to light, literally, from one of the other attackers, he finds out that he actually does kill this ensign.
Mhm.
So here's the thing about the darkness of this fight, and there's some parallels that I definitely wanted to draw from this, but he senses this coming. Do you think it was instinct, or do you think it truly was the Force?
No, I think we're supposed to take away that it is definitely the Force because one, he
Mhm.
sees like the glow of the vibroblade, but then vibroblades don't glow. And I
Right.
think the other two key things about this are this happened in the dark. That's not that's not just because they're there on Apatros and they turn off the lights. It's because you know Dust develops in the dark, and so
Mhm.
it's another metaphor for the or simile for the dark side here. So he senses this, but I also think part of it is because he senses the anger and hatred coming off the soldiers. That he just showed up in the cantina and now they're there. And, during the fight, he senses the vibroblade, but, he had two instances of the Force letting him anticipate things that the average person could not in this. And I think it's because, he's tapping in to that raw hatred, that raw anger. And, back to what Groshik was saying just a bit ago, it's something was going on here. I could feel it coming off of you. And, whether Des intends for it or not, that's where his life is. He's angry at his dead father. He's angry with having his fate controlled by ORO. He's always angry about, what happened with Gerd and the other miners. And now, pile it on with these Republic soldiers.
Absolutely. And the fact that you keyed in on the darkness, I think, is definitely a key aspect there. And the what I drew from this is that, to me, it kind of relates to Luke having the blast shield down on the helmet, when Obi-Wan was trying to get him to be in touch with the Force to fight the training droid on the Millennium Falcon for the first time. But obviously the difference here is that Luke is being trained to trust in the Force, but Des is being forced to survive. But yet it's still the same kind of an idea that neither one of them could see with their eyes, but they had to see through the Force. And so, like we pointed out, the vibroblade glowing not being an energy weapon is obviously a key to that. So then after this whole thing happens, Des is kind of quickly weighing his options, and he's thinking, okay, I can't go back to my house, my abode. They're going to look for me there. I can't go to the mines because it's just it'll take me too long to get there. If I go out into the open, it'll just be not a good thing. So he decides that he's going to go back to Groshik's cantina. So he knocks on the door, and Groshik answers just a few seconds later and pulls him in, sees all the blood, and Des reassures him that it's not his. And so he tells him the entire story. And so all of a sudden Groshik says to him, well, you've got another option. Did you really mean what you said about the Sith? And Des is kind of not really picking up what he's putting down here, but he said, I can get you off world. I know people. And the first thing Des says is, I thought you didn't choose sides. And he's like, well, sometimes you have to be able to keep your options open, kind of thing. But Groshik lays out the good, the bad, and the ugly of joining the Sith, which I think was, a good thing on his part. Like, he wasn't just saying, hey, you should do this, like, get off world, you should go do this. He really said, all right, this is what you're going to get into, and you got to really think about this and make this decision. But how did you feel about Groshik's role in this whole thing and helping Des get off world?
Well, it's kind of interesting is that, the Groshik in a way is the messenger and the whole call to it, call to adventure here, the hero's journey, that the anti-hero's journey, the villain's journey, whatever you want to call it for Bane here, is that, he's the one that sensed what was going on with Bane back in, while they're playing Sabacc. And now he's the one putting him on this path to join the Sith army. And so he kind of calls it out, and he warns him of the adventures, and it's kind of flip of an Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is all in on recruiting Luke. It's like, you'll need to train in the ways of the Force if you're going to accompany with me to Alderaan. And meanwhile, Groshik is like, I've got this option for you, but you really need to consider it. And then it's like, oh, I guess you don't really have a choice in this situation. So I think it's interesting here. We don't see Groshik again after this. This is it. He's got this moment for Des, and he provides him this opportunity. But for me, the biggest thing is that he says, don't count on others for help. In the end, each of us is in this alone. The survivors are those who know how to look out for themselves.
Yes.
Which we're going to see is a very big contrast into, between this and what Des actually does in the next chapter. But I think it's very influential for Des when he develops the rule of two as Darth Bane by the end of this book here, because it's not about safety in numbers. It's not about consolidating the power amongst the many. It is about, consolidating about the power in the few and then taking it to the Jedi that way in this regard. So I don't know. I can't remember. It's been a while I've read this. I don't know if Des ever reflects on this again, but it's one of the first people to say that to him.
Yeah, it truly is. And I think honestly, Groshik's one of the more underrated characters in the novel because, as you
Mhm.
said, he's kind of Dessa's first call in the hero's journey to
Uh-huh.
adventure. And when he lays out, like I said, the good, the bad, and the ugly of joining the Sith, he doesn't romanticize it. He doesn't warn Dessa away, but he does frame it as alignment and not an opportunity. You can
Mhm.
either go to prison and yeah, you'll be there for a few years and then you'll have a clean record. But or you can just go join the Sith and you can kind of reinvent yourself. And Dessa's logic is kind of chillingly rational. He thinks, okay, well, if I go to prison, it's going to be an even slower erasure of myself. Or I can join the Sith and it's kind of dangerous, but it has potential. And he realizes, Death realizes that strength isn't moral, it's currency.
Right.
And so that's where, this idea of, all right, they do represent or respect strength. And can I just say that I love the fact that Groshik said, yeah, you could try to disguise yourself, but you tend to stand out in a crowd.
Yeah.
I love that. But at any rate, so, that's where ultimately, obviously, Des makes that decision. And so when he leaves Apatros, he gets on this cargo ship piloted by a Rhodian. The oil company kind of does this cursory search. There was no reward that was offered for Des because, as Des kind of figured, Oro didn't want to pay the bounty. And as long as they proved that they tried to find the killer, then that was probably going to be enough for them. But my question here to you is, who do you think paid for Dessa's transport? Do you think it was Groshik, or did Groshik contact the Sith and the Sith paid the Rhodian for the enlistee? Like, it's kind of a small detail, but I thought, okay, I can't imagine that this Rhodian is doing this for nothing.
Oh, I suspect it was Seth that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I hesitate to speak about something that I don't have a whole lot of experience with myself, but it's, headhunters, right? It's you pay the guys that bring you the work, and the employees a kickback for doing so. And so I feel like that's what's going on here is that you bring us soldiers, you'll get something for it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's my take.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking kind of the same thing myself, but
Mhm.
I thought it was an interesting little detail that I know the first couple of times that I read the book, I didn't even think about it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So another thing I wanted to point out really quickly before we head over to chapter 6 is just the idea that for me personally, I appreciated the little details about certain things in other parts of the Star Wars galaxy, so to speak, that were mentioned or referenced. For example, the Kortig brandy that
Yeah.
Groshik pulls out, that's from Kashyyyk. And, he's already shared a drink with him before, and he had poured Des a drink when he first came into the cantina earlier in the day, but they went out of their way, or Drew Karpyshyn went out of his way to explain that this is some good stuff, and it's not the hard stuff that the Wookiees drink. But the first gulp that Des takes, he's like, oh my gosh, this is mild, like what's the rest of it like? But I really appreciated that as far as those little nuanced details. But how about you, or was there anything else in the chapter that stood out to you as a detail that you wanted to point out?
That's one that I had highlighted as well was the Cordic brandy. And I did not have an opportunity to do a longer search, but I was like wondering if anyone had come up with something like that for, a recipe online about what Cordic brandy might be if we wanted to make a version. I mean, Des nearly chokes on it. It's so strong. And then,
Right.
and this is the watered down version compared to what the Wookiees usually drink. So I'm just curious if I could find, and I haven't been able to find a recipe that maybe someone came up with that would just be kind of fun to, maybe make for Star Wars Day or something, but May the 4th.
Yeah.
But no, no, but I think we hit the other highlights of that chapter.
Okay, perfect. So moving on then to chapter 6. So in chapter 6, we see Des's Sith service on Fasira. We are now 1 year later. Des is a sergeant in the Sith army, and he is not necessarily about having the newest fangled, if you will, kind of weaponry. He sticks to his tried and true TC-22 rifle that he has maintained very well over the course of his service. He also has a GSI 21D pistol. He really enjoys being a soldier in the Sith army. There's a lot of camaraderie there. He's actually the leader of the Gloom Walkers. He's got some distinguished service. He is serving alongside Senior Trooper Adenar, who they were both conscripted from day one together. And he takes care of his group. And so now we're seeing him in the situation with Lieutenant Ulabor, and they have this war on the attrition on Kashyyyk. And Des is receiving these orders that they're supposed to move out to do this particular job, if you will, duty, when it's still light out. And Des is basically saying, this is not good. We're going to get seen. We're going to get mown down. I don't agree with this. And Ulabor is just not having it at all. And so things
That's actually
ensue,
on Fasira, not Kashyyyk.
Or Fasira, sorry. Yes, on Fasira. And so things ensue, and Bane takes things into his own hands. Des takes things into his own hands, and he knocks out Ulabor and tells his troops that, you know, what I've done here is you could be court-martialed for this. And if you don't want to join me from here, I completely understand. And so I very much condensed that chapter. Obviously, it was kind of a high-level summary there. So there's a lot of things that I left out, a lot of things that we need to hit on here. But I guess my first question to you is, you know, obviously Des has been fighting for over a year. He's risen to sergeant. That matters. So how do you feel about this kind of switch from, you know, obviously Des had so much anger in him when he left Apatros, and now he is part of a group that has camaraderie, it has trust, it has hierarchy, it has service attached to it. Like I said, he's been a decorated servant in the war. And how do you think that this has changed him, if at all, from where he was on Apatros just a year earlier?
Well, okay, it's interesting. You know, like I said in the last chapter, he gets that advice from Groshik that, you know, at the end, you just got to rely on yourself because, you know, the survivors are those who know how to look out for themselves. But here we get these multiple instances over the course of this chapter about his history in this 1 year. They went to Kashyyyk, and that was the actual war of attrition where, you know, the Wookiees fled into the trees, and then the Sith army was struggling to keep up, but eventually they did. And a lot of what happened was it was Death using his ability with the Force. Once again, he was able to sense where they are and defeat the Wookiees that way. But then afterwards, you know, when the remains of the Republic went to Trandosha and they were at the city of Hiskor, the Trandoshans showed up and started wiping people out because, you know, they're all about hunting and killing and the like. And then, you know, the Sith army defeated them as well. And then a bunch of Trandoshans just joined up because all they cared about was carrying on with this. So Des has had an opportunity to use these skills that he doesn't know where they come from, that we all, of course, know as the Force. And he's developed these relationships with these other soldiers. And so I don't know that it necessarily contradicts the advice that Groshik gave him, and it necessarily contradicts the man that Bane will become, because these people are essentially resources. He may think fondly of them, and that's all true up until the end, when he realizes that if they go through with this mission as it's been relayed by Ulabor from a Sith warlord, they're going to be walking into a slaughter. And so he takes action. He knocks out the lieutenant and says, we're going to do this differently. But you can also say that's as much for his own survival as it was for for the survival of his men. And, you know, so he makes a big decision. Now he puts it to them. He does not coerce anybody into following along with him. He flat out tells them, as you said, that I've committed mutiny with these acts, and there will be repercussions for this, or there could be. So, you know, you don't have to follow along. And they all do that double tap chest tap. So that's just cool. We see that in a lot of places, but in a way, he's still, what choice do any of them have? Right. I mean, he's the guy that is proven to be the leader, that is, you know, he's the one that's been able to suss out the traps. He's been the one that's been able to figure out where the enemy is and stuff like this. So do they have another choice in this, which is, you do it Des's way and you might live, but there may be repercussions, or you stay behind, there'll definitely be repercussions, or you go ahead without the rest of the army at this, the squad at this point, in which case you're going to get wiped out. So he is kind of, while you might describe it as altruistic, he really is exerting his will over everybody in this situation.
Oh, absolutely. And, he rejects weak leadership because he knows that it's going to poison everybody in the end, and it poisons strength. It breaks down the entire infrastructure of everything that they're working towards. And that's the thing. I mean, Ulabor follows these orders without question. And it's because he's afraid to speak up. It's not that, and Dest knows that from the very beginning. It's not because he knows that these orders are going to get them killed. He just doesn't want to speak up. And
Right.
Des definitely does not respect that. So he knows the order is incompetent. He knows it's going to get his people killed. And he knows that Ulabor lacks the strength to adapt. And realistically, I mean, that's foreshadowing Des's eventual rejection of the Sith Brotherhood,
Yep.
because weak leadership poisons strength, like I said, and he would rather risk that court-martial than obey stupidity. And this is the seed of that belief that comes in later on.
Right. And the other thing is, like, Des's ability to strategize and to think about solutions comes out here, which is, wait a minute, it's going to take the army 3 hours to get to this base, but we can be done with this mission in an hour. And so we can do this, we can complete our mission and survive. And, but if we do as they ordered, we're not going to complete the mission. We're not going to survive. So it shows his cunning. It shows his intelligence in all of this. He's not just the brute that he gets looked upon by so many of the miners back on Apatros here. This is a guy who can, he understands some tactics. He understands how to solve problems and make the best of things. But like you said, Ulabor is like, oh, I'm not going to question the Sith, the warlord that gave me these orders. No way on this. Even if that means we all get killed in that. Okay. But you don't even have to. The point was not to walk into a trap and get obliterated. The point was to go out and take out the outpost so the army can take out the base.
Right.
And Des is the one that's going to figure out how to make that happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there was a couple other things in here too that I thought were worth mentioning, because as I said at the very beginning of the chapter, Des points out that he could have gotten the newest, shiniest tech models of his weapons, but he chose to continue to maintain the ones that he has. And, I think for Des, that mirrors his later philosophies as Darth Bane. He doesn't want more Sith, he wants better Sith. It's quantity over, or quality over quantity. And so just taking care of what he already has, I think it speaks a lot for him. But the other thing too that I picked out in here is the idea that, again, as you were mentioning, that Des kind of just said, well, I have these foreshadowings and I just kind of accept it at this point. And it's kind of the same thing that, once again, mirrors Luke's training, as referenced earlier on, by kind of reinforcing your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them. So Des is really leaning into that idea of his instinct, and that his ability to feel things out and predict what's going to happen next. He just stops questioning it. So he just goes with it, which I just love that.
Yeah, I
All
agree.
right.
Yeah, I just got to, before we wrap this up, I did want to just touch back on, like, the history. I loved the description. It's not long and it's drawn out, but it provides enough detail when Karpyshyn's telling us about what happened on Groshik and what happened on his Trandosha, or on the city of Hiskor. Because the rivalry between the Wookiees and the Trandoshans and that area of space goes way, way, way back in Legends and the expanded universe and everything there. But going to Kashyyyk and then having to fight guerrilla warfare against the Wookiees on their terrain was cool. And then they finally win that, and then having to go to Trandosha just for the Trandoshans to be licking their lips hey, here's a challenge. We can get honor
Right.
in our system of getting things. And then it's like, okay, well, we've been defeated, but if we sign up with you, we get to go hunt and kill more people, right? It's I, I mean, masterful writing, maybe not, but great details there that really helps accomplish the world building that is prevalent in this book.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, and we see that kind of character building even translated into later canon things. I mean, I'm just thinking of the Clone Wars, and the way the
Mhm.
Transoceans are represented in the Clone Wars as well. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so much world building here. So, I guess my last question to you before we wrap it up is the whole war that Des is serving in at this point is kind of the starting point for, even though he doesn't really know it yet, but Des's ideas about Sith ideology and where he ends up later in his training and then eventually establishing the rule of two. So, where do you think Des is right now with what is this war teaching him about how he becomes the Sith master that he later becomes?
Well, I think the real answer to that's going to come in chapters we're going to be covering next time. But
Mhm.
for right now, it is this notion that dilution of talent, dilution of power, as seen in Ulubar here. Ulubar, he's basically riding Des's coattails here. It was Des that stood up and made the Gloom Walkers successful in those other two battles we were just talking about. But Des wasn't even a sergeant at that point. He was still a private. He had no rank at all. And Ulubar, took the credit, promoted Des to sergeant to take advantage of that. But Des is looking up and saying, the guy in front of me doesn't deserve to have his power. It's been
Mhm.
diluted, which is exactly the type of observations he's going to make later with the Sith themselves.
Yes. 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 I totally agree with that. Yes. He's got this contempt for incompetent leadership. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what Ulabor represents. And so that's where this contempt for that hierarchy begins. And the idea that eliminating titles, because the Sith were all equals, Des already knows that that's not going to fly. Equality without strength is basically suicide. And so that's
Right.
what he's establishing at this point. So yeah, I love that. So anything else that you want to point out symbolically or, just from the chapters themselves before we wrap it up?
No, nothing. Not so much. Just that this book, this reading is fun, just because of all of the additional media that we've had with Star Wars over the past couple of years. Everything that's been on screen. I've been envisioning, in my head as I read this, a lot of the stuff in a way that I hadn't before. My previous readings. I know you read these books like every year. I read them every
Mhm.
few years or whatever. It's been a few since I've had an opportunity to read it here, but just some of the with what happened on Kashyyyk, especially after a number of episodes of the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith and everything else, and having watched so much of that stuff recently, it's a bit more vivid in my imagination. And so this is a book that I think it was great the first time I read it. It's been great each additional time I've read it, but each experience is benefits from everything else that's come out behind it. So it's just been fun that way.
Oh, I agree. And if there's any book to movie adaptation that I would vote for, this has got to be it. And I know it'll never happen, but
Right.
it's definitely a wish list kind of a thing. And you know what? We need to take some time and maybe do some fan casting of these characters in the book too, because I know it's so much fun. And I'm just like you, like I can envision every single portion of this, every little scene. And now that we've been breaking it down, just like we do with our movie discussions and getting into the real nitty gritty of things and getting really deep into the weeds, it's just been even more vivid, like you pointed out,
Mhm.
which is great. The only other thing I wanted to point out is just the fact that I love the name, the Gloom Walkers. I just
Mhm.
think it's so perfect because that's kind of where Des is right now. Like he's kind of on the cusp of the dark side. He's sort of walking in that twilight between worlds kind of thing. And the fact that they were moving out after dusk too, I think is very poignant in there as well. So there you go. Yeah. Wow. Great chapters. And once again, boy, we're really getting into some great detail here. So let us know what you think. And next installment will be in about a month's time, where we will be covering chapters 7 through 9. So if you've been keeping up with us, and hopefully you have, and you've been enjoying this discussion, make sure you get your book out or your audiobook, or do your side by side, and get ready for that at the end of March. So thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of our Darth Bane Path of Destruction book club series for this year. And before we go, we just want to let you know that you can subscribe to the show on RetroZap, and you can also like, rate, and subscribe lots of other places as well. And you can do that on all of our podcatchers, including Audible, Spotify, and a few others that Dennis is going to tell you about here in just a second. And you can also find all kinds of other fun stuff over on the RetroZap network, including, and not limited to, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. case files, Animatacast, Dooncast, Enjoy Stuff, Superhero Suite, and much, much more. And we'd love it if you would rate and review the podcast, especially if that's on Apple Podcasts. That seems to boost us up the algorithms a little bit more, but we'll definitely take your ratings and reviews anywhere you're willing to give those to us. And one more time, Dennis, can you remind everybody what our social media contacts are before we go?
Sure. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. Jay's got some Pinterest boards set up for us where you can find some things there. The show is over on YouTube and YouTube Music, audio only. We do not have video, not yet. We can be reached via email at podcaststardust@gmail.com. As Jay was suggesting earlier, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and love to share those on the next edition of the book club if we get them. And then if you're looking for T-shirts, socks, and all kinds of other things that they have, with the Podcast Stardust logo on them, you can go check that out over at TeePublic. I've got a link in the show notes for that. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay?
Sure thing. So you can always check me out on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I'm over there as Ahsoka, 2 different versions of Hera, the 4th sister Inquisitor. So that's my big baddie with the red lightsaber, and my original concept Mandalorian as well. And Dennis, do you want to let everybody know what our current upcoming plan is for the show before we go?
Right. So, usual plan, on Friday, we'll be wrapping up the week with some Star Wars news, presuming there is some. And then on Monday, we'll be getting back into our Clone Wars rewatch with a look at episode 13 from season 3. But with that, I want to thank you all for listening to episode 1007 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.